Uncle Dan,
Yes.
this is a season of celebration.
It is?
It is. It's not just...
It doesn't feel like one.
It certainly doesn't, but it
I
is,
am going to
goddammit.
say very much it feels not... I haven't felt like celebrating at all.
Yeah, and at least on the calendar, it's a season of celebration. And
Yeah.
for all you poor folks in the other 49 stupid states, you're done. Your celebration's over, but ours is just beginning here in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
We have the Mormon Independence Day coming up on the 24th. Yeah. So why don't we pick on them?
Yeah. Hey, Uncle Mark, what's long and hard and full of semen?
Well, that's I don't know why you're bringing that up, because I'm going to talk about boats.
Okay, fine.
So, guys, if there's one thing people have come to rely on us for, it's straight talk about boats. You know what I mean?
Yacht
Boat
talk.
Old dead gods are cool, and who doesn't like to check the big board of cult body counts every week? But it's boat talk that keeps the Patreon cash rolling in like a green tide under a big wooden boat. Well, if you're like Chris Angel Mindfreak and you exclusively tune in for our blue ribbon boat banter, today is your lucky day. Boats, we got them. So, today's boat, or rather boats, are of a very special class indeed, fellas. Boats plural because there's 8 of them, and special class because they have no propulsion, no keels, or rudders, or windows. They got a pluggable hole in the top and the bottom, and while technically called barges, are designed to function even when fully submerged, making them not barges at all, but submarines. Is this the best boat bait ever, you guys?
It's a Nimitz class, I think.
It is a Nimitz class. Yeah, I think it's a November class.
It's a Nimrod class.
Oh, good, Doug.
Thank
Doug
you.
knows where I'm going. So paddle with me back to the 1830s, guys. We're a weird kid that would later go on to get his ass shot out of a window for marrying and raping other men's wives and daughters, decided to write a book. But rather than put pen to paper, he put rock to hat and yelled at his dumb friend behind a curtain the contents of some ancient Mayan gold plates he'd found out past the fence of his family's farm near Niagara Falls, which no one else ever actually saw. The gold plates, I mean, not Niagara Falls. Those were in Superman 2. Everybody saw those. So the book he wrote is a bone-crushingly boring saga of a bunch of Middle Eastern Jews building a big old boat and ditching Jerusalem sometime around 600 BCE, sailing to the unpeopled Americas 900 years before Columbus, then splitting into warring factions of good white Jews and bad brown ones, having battles with more casualties than the biggest battles of World War II, blah, blah, blah. That's why indigenous Americans exist. All it makes is sense. But that big old boat is not the one on deck today. So at the end of this blathering story without any real point or moral called the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith dashed out a bizarre additional chapter called the Book of Ether that definitely feels extremely rushed for some reason. Doug, you've read it.
I have.
Yeah, and it's very weird.
It's basically almost basically a retelling of the Book of Mormon with different characters and really, really fast.
Yeah, so, compared to the rest of the Book of Mormon, it's lightning speed. So
I do like. I do want to quickly interject that I think it's delightful. So Mark Twain said that the Book of Mormon was chloroform in print.
yeah,
And then Christopher Hitchens accused him of hitting too close to the mark, considering it does have a book called Ether. I just wanted to point
exactly right. So, Doug, you thought that maybe the Book of Ether was written right at the end because some contemporary archaeological find was much older than the narrative of the family of Nephi colonizing the Americas in 600 BCE. So Joseph Smith had to quickly have an answer for that. I couldn't find anything to support that. And I even
have heard that once, and I don't remember where. And I've sent out some feelers as well. But, the beginning of the Book of Mormon is 600 BCE, which is obviously much, much too recent.
Yeah.
And I had heard that when Joseph Smith was near finishing the Book of Mormon, they had discovered something that predated that, so he needed to find a way to kind of move the starting date.
Well, we couldn't find anything to corroborate that.
No,
so
I couldn't either.
You go into the boat banter brig with all the spiders, Uncle Doug. So, old make it up as you go Joe dashed out the Book of Ether, which is mercifully short, but for some fucking reason, as Doug mentioned, is just a highly abridged duplicate story of the Book of Mormon, but set 1,600 years before it. So, In this book, the central character is a guy called Jared, but no, he isn't. The central character is Jared's brother, who, though he is referred to dozens of times and is literally the protagonist, never gets a name other than brother of Jared, which is kind of a hoot because Joseph Smith was just a whiz at making up names. So I don't know why he didn't just call him Anti-Ho Jared Ha Zohar Ha and call it a day. Fuck no.
Well, wait, you know what his name is, right?
Well, but that's not canonical. What it kind of is, but it came after he wrote the book.
It came after he wrote the book, but he did come up with a name every bit as ridiculous as what you just said.
Would you like to tell the folks at home what it is, Dan?
I would like to do that. His name was Mahanrai Moriyankamer.
That is the stupidest thing anyone has ever said in the world.
This is
I
true.
wish I had. And what's delightful is I didn't have to make that up. That's just what.
Yeah, Joseph Smith didn't put it in the story in their canonical book. Some guy asked him to bless his son like years later, right?
Yeah. Right.
And he blessed his baby, and he said, "Oh, will you give him a name?" And he said, "Yes, little Mahanrai Moriyankamer." And they were like, "Brr." And he said, "Oh yeah, that's the real name of the brother of Jared. I just didn't make it into the first draft."
You got to give it to him. That is literally the world's first encrypted password.
Yeah, it is also a genital wart. So
Yeah.
you got to get your Mahanrai Moriyankamers looked at. So
You just get some Nephite cream and it clears it right up.
Mahanrai
It makes it
Moriyankamer, I
white
hardly know
delightsome.
her.
So, in the Book of Ether, Jared and brother of Jared are chilling in the shadow of the biblical Tower of Babel when the great confounding happens. Jared and brother of Jared don't want to have to learn a second language. They were totally destined to become Americans. So, they ask the Lord what to do, and he says, "Go chill in the valley of Nimrod." Sure. Now, according to Mormon, and you cannot see these massive air quotes my fingers are making, archaeology, there is some disagreement on where the made-up the Valley of Nimrod is. Some websites say the Mesopotamian River Valley. Okay, fine. And others say somewhere, including Hugh Nibley, say somewhere north of Yerevan, Armenia, and south of Tbilisi, Georgia, in the Caucasus Mountains.
Hugh Nibley,
So
by the
there-
way, it bears mentioning, for those who don't, Hugh Nibley is a Mormon intellectual, same air quotes.
Yeah, he's kind of the original apologist. So,
Yeah.
so
But I
there-
mean, you can't take him even if you wanted to take him seriously. His name is Hugh Nibley. You can't.
yeah, Nibley. So
Hugh Nibley. Yeah.
there in the arid, rocky valleys, the Lard directed brother of Jared and his brother Jared to, wait for it, build barges in the Armenian mountains.
Right.
And in these, quote, large barges, they transported much livestock and fowl, and swarms of bees, and even somehow loads of live fish. And they sailed these large barges in the Valley of Nimrod, which the Nimrods at Mormon apologist sites claim, and I cannot stress this enough, is in the barren highlands of the Caucasus Mountains of Armenia.
Well,
I've
they
been to
had
the
to be
mountains
for
north
these
of
guys
Jared.
to be Caucasians.
Maybe that's it.
Well,
So I've been to the mountains north of Yerevan, Armenia, and they are spectacularly gorgeous, but I could best describe them as dry. And also mountains. Now, there are some smallish rivers and a lake that's nothing to sneeze at, but nothing large barges could possibly navigate. A huge wooden structure full of animals in the mountains is, Brother Joseph, not called a barge, but rather a barn. Words. How the
hey,
fuck do they work?
isn't Large Barge the person who gave Pee Wee Herman a ride?
That's right. She took him to the promised land.
Yep.
So, weirdly, there is almost no point to this part of the story except to create precedent for the real whale of a tale that comes next. So, after 4 years of good, clean barge living in the Rocky Islands, the Lord commands Jared and his brother to strike out on an adventure more suited to boats and barges of all sorts, an ocean voyage with water rather than mountains to the promised land, that is the Americas, that the people in the first chapters of the Book of Mormon already did 1,600 years later. What the fuck is up with this timeline?
So it bears mentioning, because I think a lot of even ex-Mormons forget about this first part, Mark, that what we're about to get to, everybody remembers, but that they built barges and like pushed them through the fucking mountains.
huge barges full of, basically, it was, I think it's an attempt to crib Noah's Ark,
Right.
but they were full of animals.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Guys, it's called a portage. It's totally doable. I don't know. You just
A sledge.
yeah.
So he commands them to build 8 barges, and the word in the book is barge. We'll come back to that. For some reason, and they are smaller than the marooned mountain barges, because why be stupid halfway when you can do it all the way? So this is where the narrative gets just a little fucking silly, starting right here. So
Oh, now?
Yep, right
now
here.
it gets silly? Okay.
Well, there, it already started. So this 8-pack of barges were built by the command of, and to the exact specifications of, Jesus H. Christ himself, the Son of God and co-creator of the universe, including all its physics, and yea, verily, even the waters the 8 barges must float upon.
Hey, he was a carpenter.
Well, let's see just how well Jesus Christ does as a marine architect and carpenter. First, like I said, they are to be smaller than the barns in the mountains. Of course, if you're about to spend a year at sea, you aren't going to need too much cargo space, as I will shortly demonstrate. Then the Lord directs them to make them, quote, like unto the lightness of a fowl upon the water. So far, so good.
Meaning it can float?
Meaning it should mostly float.
Okay.
So, ironically, throughout Joseph Smith's numbing blizzard of high word count writing, he's always very light on detail. Like the Liahona, the useless magic 8-ball we discussed in episode 110.
Right.
He would shrug off the hard work of detailed descriptions by saying it was, quote, of curious workmanship. The barge version of curious workmanship, deployed multiple times here, is that being, quote, tight like unto a dish. The sides were tight like unto a dish. The top was tight like unto a dish. The bottom was tight. Okay, fucking get it, Joseph. You hack. You couldn't
But we
describe
don't get it. What does that mean?
But you know, he couldn't describe a boat, but he knew what a dish looked like because he ate his stewed opossum off one every night. This is the Mormon prophetic version of saying "I love lamp." Fucking lazy goddamn writer.
But he did. You're right. He knew what a dish looked like. I just don't get how it's tight.
Right.
In
or
what way is a dish tight?
yeah,
And
Yeah,
how
a
does
dish
that
is-
apply
A dish
to
is
boat building?
an object comprised of a single material completely.
Yeah.
It is not many strips of ceramic kind of fused together like a
Right.
ship.
Pulled taut over itself in some sort of way.
Yeah. Okay, so now we've established the leak-proof Corningware bona fides of your little barges. You're good to go, I guess Jesus said. But then not Jared, but his brother, who is obviously smarter than Jesus, knower of all things, said, hey, hold on a tick. There is literally no way in or out of these pontoons. Also, no light or air inside. How do we even steer these water coffins? Jesus,
Lancelot, Galahad, and I get into the boat.
exactly. And
Jesus-
so they got to the point where they had built these things and they're standing on top of them with their stupid wooden hammers going, oh, shit. Wait a
How do
second.
we get in?
Exactly. So Jesus, who had apparently not thought of these things, was like, "Oh shit, right? Yeah, just make a little hole in the top and then in the bottom too. Master shipbuilding right there, and make some kind of a cork. So when you need some air, pull out the cork, and before you go to battle stations, just jam it back in. Okay, we good? You guys." Guy who's smarter than me, Jesus Christ, but doesn't merit his own name.
Doesn't that make that tight like unto a colander?
Exact tight like unto a gravy boat.
Onto a slotted spoon.
So you will notice he did not say a fucking word about steering them, nor will he. So we joke all the time about these being 4,220-year-old pre-Columbian wooden submarines built by nomadic desert Jews. Mormon apologists run all the way up to their poop decks in a huff about this, furiously saying the word in the Book of Mormon is barges. And they are absolutely correct. A barge is a surface craft that carries goods, etc. But these 8 barges were designed by Jesus to, yes, float on the surface, but as the narrative makes clear several times in passages like this one, Ether chapter 6, verse 7, they also go underwater. Quote, and it came to pass, classic start, that when they were buried in the deep, there was no water that could hurt them, their vessels being tight like unto a dish, and also they were tight like unto the ark of Noah. Therefore, When they were encompassed about by many waters, they did cry unto the Lord, and he did bring them forth again upon the top of the waters. They were underwater. Two things.
In their wooden boat.
In their wooden boat, in their barge. Two things. Citing Noah here does not help. As it has been conclusively proven, the Noah story in Genesis is fucking absurd. It didn't happen. And in any case, it was a story stolen from the much older fable of Utnapishtim and Gilgamesh, as we discussed in episode 53, which in turn was likely synthesized from the older Mesopotamian flood narrative of Ziusudra, as discussed in episode 133. Citing
Can I
those
just say,
old
by the way,
fables...
sorry, I hate to interject, but can I just say that Utnapishtim is actually, I believe, Aramaic for Mahanrai Moriankamer.
I think, by God, you're onto something here, Hugh. So anyway, citing those old fables gives you no help, Joe. But a barge that goes totally underwater sinks. Barges go on top of the water, not under it, and if they do, it's just the one time, and then you need the new barge. Right. A boat that can float on the surface and also can survive being totally submersed is called a fucking submarine. I'm not wrong to call them submarines. Joseph was wrong to call them barges. Submarines. They're definitionally submarines. Like early German U-boats, they spent most of their time on the surface and then would dive for short times for attack or hiding. And all the air that was in there when you pounded the cork back or closed the actually watertight steel hatch was all you had. But even primitive German subs had propulsion, they had steering, they had internal lighting, semi-modern food and water storage, and a way to, if not pleasantly, but at least manage feces and urine. Mm-hmm. Jared's brother had none of those. Well, one. Remember when the guy who was related to Jared by birth but wasn't deemed important enough to have a name asked Jesus about lighting? One funny aside before I get to what happened. He asked what should they do for windows, saying, "For behold, ye cannot have windows, for they will be dashed in pieces." Fair point, smart sibling of useless minor character who has a name. It seems here he's referring to the futility of plate glass windows in submarines, in which case he is both correct and a time traveler.
Right.
Since the first evidence of plate glass used in building window openings is from Roman Alexandria 2,300 years after this story allegedly took place.
Totally, yeah.
There were no plate glass windows. But how was Joseph to know such trivia in time to hit print on his totally true Third Testament of the totally true Bible? But again, Jesus didn't come up with the workaround for the light issue. Brother of Jared did, when he, quote, moltened some glass marbles out of a mountain and asked Jesus to touch them and make them glow, which he obligingly did, in the process of which Jared's brother saw Jesus' finger and apparently came in his pants. It doesn't matter. This is a submarine story. You can go read all the other bits if you want, but seriously, why would you? So, the boats had no oars or sails. Even though Joseph Smith knew these were ancient forms of seafaring, see the story of Nephi written earlier, but happening later in the same train wreck of a book. These barges would just driftwood the whole length of the Mediterranean, through the Straits of Gibraltar, and then across the violent Atlantic to Central America. As I said, they had no keel or rudder, so they were not only totally unsteerable, they would just roll around in the tide.
Oh my God.
Capsizing and uncapsizing at random. Thus the hole in the bottom of the tight like a dish boat, so they could open that for an occasional breath whence they were upside down. Now I don't.
Yeah, it's basically you're on the spin cycle for the entire time that you're floating in. Now you said I do have to call you on something. You said that there was no way to handle feces and urine, but how do you think you use that hole? It's just for air.
Well, we'll get to it. So now I don't know everything about boats. I don't know everything about boats, you guys, but I obviously know more than both Joseph Smith and Jesus. An airless wooden boat drifting aimlessly in the Atlantic, rolling over like a fucking rock tumbler at random, full of people, farm animals, mounds of feed and poo, and giant earthenware jugs and jars of fresh water and liquid is insane. Imagine the putrid, carcassy death ooze that would trickle out of these unsurvivable murder barrels when they finally hit a reef somewhere. So
just explode.
They would explode. So many problems here. Let us try even to begin to understand this insanity. Later in the text, it tells us that in addition to Jared and his brother, there were 22 other people who made the journey. So 24 people. So that works out to 3 people per submarine. Each person needs 3 to 5 pounds of food a day, so let's average it 4. It was a 344-day trip. Just fucking imagine that locked away in the suffocating darkness. Anyway, added up, that's 4,128 pounds of food for the people in each barge, over 2 tons.
Whew.
An adult person should drink half a gallon of water a day. So let's say old-timey people could live on that in their weird boat. That's about 600 gallons just for drinking, no washing, no cooking. So you have to more than double that to maintain any sort of hygiene. So you need 1,500 gallons per boat minimum for the people. And that's just for the people. They brought all their livestock with them. Their mountain barges were explicitly about having all the beasts of the field and swarms of bees and the birds of the sky and even fucking fish stock tanks in them. So let's be reasonable and say each of these barges had 2 mating pairs each of cows, sheep, and goats. Just pulling that out of my butt. A bare minimum to maintain a healthy herd in the New World. We won't even bother with chickens, etc., which is, since this is a ripoff of Noah and the Ark, I imagine they would have had tons of fowl as well, but we don't have all day. A low estimate for how much each animal eats per day times 344 days comes out to 48,160 pounds of animal feed.
That's sure.
24 tons in each boat, which is the max capacity of a fully loaded 40-foot tractor trailer. But since dry hay isn't that dense, it would take at least the volume of 2.5 40-foot trailers to store that much food, plus a low guesstimate of 23,516 gallons of water for the animals. To put that in perspective, that would be the same volume of water as in an above-ground backyard pool that is 52 inches deep and 33 feet in diameter, or more than the capacity of 2 full-size diesel truck tanker trailers, right? Just for the hydration for the animals to survive in each boat. That's 200,000 pounds of water in each submarine.
Oh my God!
And what was the staggering supply of water stored in? Some tight like a motherfucking dish wooden tanks, a shit ton of super heavy earthen jugs. A typical earthenware Greek amphora at the time could hold about 5 gallons. And remember, you have to keep this water uncontaminated by the tonnage of urine and shit on the boat, or deadly diseases like dysentery are inevitable. And the only way in and out of these ships was a small hatch in the top or bottom. Can you imagine trying to get amphoras into that, or a cow, without breaking its legs and back? How long did it take to load these tens of tons of provisions into these dark, airless spaces, let alone gather that much sustenance beforehand? Pardon me. So in addition to building 8 weird barges with poor tools and materials and know-how, these 24 people had to grow, harvest, procure, and store 36 semi-truckloads of non-perishable food and fresh water before they even got on the submarines. 36 truckloads, 24 people, in a time when eking out subsistence living with no excess was considered good. And what happens to all that tonnage of food and water once everyone on board has had their meal? And in the case of the cows, a minimum of 5 gallons of water per day to drink. That's right. You live inside something Dante couldn't have dreamed of on his worst day. A spinning, tumbling, 360-degree litter box in near total darkness with livestock, fellow passengers, shattered beehives and swarms of angry bees, hay bales, bushels, and clay jars full of 200,000 pounds of water tumbling through space in all directions, covered in sloppy, urine-saturated feces, wheat stalks, and barley like Satan's own shake and bake. You should totally turn back, but whoops, you can't. There's no steering wheel. It's fucking nightmarish. Again, if a single thing could survive this journey, that's the true miracle.
And what about you? I mean, you didn't even bring up the scurvy, right?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is they couldn't have fire inside, according to the scripture, so they couldn't cook anything. So everything had to be like a prepared meal. Like
that's a lot of roughage.
Yeah. What did they have that could last a year as far as human food?
I mean, the other side of this whole thing is that it even says, I believe, in the narrative, like, if you take the cork off the top and water rushes in, just put the cork back because there's no windows. Right. You don't know if you're underwater or not.
Right,
exactly. And those corks have to open into the thing. Whatever's plugging it has to open in, which means that a little bit of water pressure will be more than enough to push that thing in.
How many seconds do you have if you're 1,000 feet underwater? Where you open the top hatch and have to push it back in by hand.
Yeah.
Like how long do you have?
And there's only 3 people in each submarine. It's not like you have an army of men to do it, right?
Right, and everything is just lubricated with feces.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Saturated with urine.
Not to mention, I hadn't realized how many of these boats there were. You're setting these things adrift with literally no navigation, and they all wind up at the same place?
How about that?
That is some good navigation right there.
So we haven't even gotten into the physics of airflow. Maybe the most immediate problem of all. We've established that these small subs have to be fairly huge just to accommodate the bare minimum of space for 3 people and at least 12 medium to large animals and the convoy of provisions required. At least 4.5 tractor trailer loads, and I hadn't figured how many amphoras can fit into a trailer yet, so it's probably more like 10. But just the people would each consume almost 400 cubic feet of air a day. That's the same volume as a big construction dumpster holds per person per day. A cow is double that, a sheep is about the same as us, and goats are a little less. You would need a minimum of 16 15-yard construction dumpsters of fresh air volume per ship per day, needing to occasionally be let in a single small hole, as well as removing the same volume of deadly carbon dioxide and methane through that same hole every day.
Yeah.
And any good HVAC person will tell you air is like water. To move it through a closed space, you need one way in, another way out, and something to motivate the flow. In a closed, damp space, all that body heat, gas, and exhalation would build up a positive pressure. So opening a single, let's say, 3-foot by 3-foot hole, and the official church illustrations, it looks more like it's 16 by 16 inches. It's tiny. So I'm being overly generous.
Yeah, that would because you can't get a cow through that.
Not a mature one, and certainly not living. That would release heat and gas and moisture, but the positive pressure would prevent any fresh air from coming in, at least until the pressure equalized. And then what would draw in the fresh air? It's a closed room. Maybe if the hatch was off for the entire trip, exterior winds could keep it at a minimal survivability in there, but it's not likely. And remember, they only open the hatch once in a while. Oh, if they open the top hatch and then the bottom one at the same time, it would do nothing to solve their air intake problem. Quite the contrary, they would sink. And while there are 99 more problems, and that's really the final one, fellas, 4,220 years ago, sailing and serious seafaring was in its infancy in the Near East. The people of the South Pacific were eons ahead of everyone in sailing capability, but that's no help here. Reed rafts and primitive dugout canoes were the most common sort of craft in the Mediterranean. The sort of sophisticated barrel-making wood joinery of boats, like the elegant Viking hulls, were 2,000 years away from being developed. And even those sophisticated craft leaked and needed constant maintenance to keep above water. Even if Jared's brother, his brother Jared, and their 22 friends had access to the huge, properly grained timbers like old-growth oaks that dotted Europe and Britain, which they did not, whether they were in Mesopotamia or the Armenian islands, the absurd level of craft and boat riding they would need to have was the result of generations of shipbuilding know-how, not until the era of the great wooden navies of the world. And even those master builders in the 17th and 18th centuries failed at every attempt to make a serviceable wooden submersible, despite many attempts. And the shipwrights of the British, French, and Russian navies, who tried, again, many times to make subs capable of just delivering one single explosive charge in a harbor in calm waters, and they failed every time, they had hardened steel tools, excellent materials, and huge, highly specialized labor forces that a tiny family of early Bronze Age desert nomads could not ever have had access to or ever conceived of. In 4220 BCE, to make 8 giant, fully watertight submarines that could withstand the pressure of being just 20 feet underwater for even a minute, again and again for a 344-day journey, which I believe is a metric year, across some of the roughest seas on Earth is inconceivable. And an actually watertight steel drum will implode at 30 feet down, and a 55-gallon steel drum is too small to be torqued and twisted and racked all day, every day by strong waves and storm forces. But if it was, it's steel, not wood, and it would survive, unlike these huge wooden submarines. And in the pointless book of Ether, all 8 submarines, Dan, as you were saying, somehow powerlessly pontoon their way from landlocked Armenia to, I don't know, fucking Guatemala, a journey of over 12,000 miles, intact and at the same time with everyone inside alive and well. In short, this story did not happen. It could not happen. So to finish, there are so many embarrassing things about Mormonism and being Mormon, but you know, guys, this is up there. This is up there with Moonquakers and Bigfoot and the Dream Mine and the Lesser Osmonds and even Super Del Shanzi. Well, maybe not that, but it's close. Every single true believing Mormon reads this story and is like, yeah, the math, it checks out. And in it, Joseph demonstrates that neither he nor Jesus knows Captain Jack shit about boats. Jared's brother saved Mr. Christ Bacon with the air hole and the glowing rocks. And why? Why is this story? Like, what is the actual purpose of this story? It's so laughably, transparently stupid.
Well, inevitably, in every Bible and Book of Mormon story, when they get pushed far enough into a corner, they hit that big button, their AZ3 button. That's like it's magic. God did it, right? So okay,
right.
Why didn't he just part the fucking Atlantic Ocean and let them walk over,
or transport them there,
or transport them via teleporter?
Yeah.
Why did they have to get into this hell pot for a year?
It's a meat grinder.
I'm being confronted every day by the stench of my own breath when I put my mask on. Can you imagine the hell that was inside these dishes?
Bees. They had bees. And it just is the stupidest fucking thing I've ever encountered. So that's submarines, guys.
Oh.
And, next, and I'd tell you one quick thing to finish is Hugh Nibley, who we mentioned earlier, who's kind of the granddaddy of Mormon apologetics. I just found this morning when I was Googling around. He said, and I'm not kidding, his apologetic is, well, they didn't go to the Mediterranean. They went overland across Asia and put their boats in by Korea.
Oh,
and then
great.
went across. They went the other way around the world.
Yeah, that actually makes sense. Okay.
Ed, when confronted, he's like, well, there's a lot of lakes in Siberia. It's like, it's not the lakes that are the problem. It's the in between the lakes.
Oh, my God.
There you go, guys. Wow. Next time a Mormon tries to tell you they weren't submarines, you can tell them definitively that they are wrong.
I got to go do some sit-ups. I like to keep my abs tight like a dish.
Well, with that, let's sail away.